Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Cover 2 podcast. I'm your co-host, Jared Smith.
And I'm Nenad.
And on today's show, it is NFL, and more NFL football for you guys. We basically have wrapped up the first round of free agency, all of the major signings where teams spend big money on players. So Nick and I are going to go through those signings, which teams got better, which teams got worse. Nick, I know, has two teams that he is ready to dish out on, and I've got a couple teams to praise on. So we're going to go a little back and forth there. We have some shocking Deshaun Watson news. Last week, there was one allegation of potential sexual assault or misconduct, and as of today, Monday, March 22nd, there are 13 different allegations. So Nick and I will jump into all of that, talk about the details and just what we know about that situation so far. But like I said, a little bit later on, we will get into free agency and all of that madness as we get into the second and third tiers. So really, most of the superstars are gone. Now it's just more about teams filling out their rosters and getting ready for the draft, which is, I believe, Nick, we're almost a month away from the draft, right?
Yeah.
So pretty soon here, we will be having our NFL draft preview show as well. Look forward to that. But Nick, let's just jump right into it, my man. Deshaun Watson, for those who do not know, he allegedly has 13 different lawsuits against him right now for misconduct towards women, and most of these have occurred or allegedly occurred at massage parlors. So I just want to get your initial reactions to these lawsuits, and obviously the fact that Deshaun Watson is going through a lot with the Houston Texans, not wanting to play for that organization and wanting to be traded. This is not a good look for him in any type of way. Nick, tell me what you think.
Yeah, I mean, this is the worst thing you could have heard as far as NFL news this week. Deshaun Watson has been, Jared, a possible topic on our show every single week for probably, I'd say, about a month, maybe even longer. We actually recorded a show that was unable to be released due to audio issues and stuff like that a couple days ago. Most of that show talked about Deshaun Watson being traded to certain teams, why certain teams had traded for him. And then the next day, all this comes out. And so luckily, we're able to sit here and talk about it now. And it would have sounded really stupid if we released that podcast. So we got lucky there. But yeah, I mean, when we recorded that podcast, we knew there was mention of something. He had responded. But now there's 13. And, it's just obviously there's no Deshaun Watson isn't in jail, right? There's no video of any of this happening. So it's all essentially the say of this lawyer and these 13 women. I'm not sitting here saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying there's no criminal stuff that has happened so far as besides allegations. So we're going to keep it at allegations. Deshaun Watson, and the Houston Texans and any other team that needed a quarterback, this is just it's a horrible situation, and I hope it's not true. But I gotta let it just play out, Jared. And I'm not gonna come out here and blame anybody. I'm not gonna demonize Deshaun Watson. I'm not gonna demonize any of the 13 women that are accusing him of something because he did something. The appropriate punishment should be dished out like any other time a player or person in the entertainment realm has done this. We've seen a lot of this in the Me Too movement. Guys off the street in a lot of ways. So if Deshaun Watson is indeed one of those bad guys, the appropriate punishment should be. And my opinion of Deshaun Watson won't be of a football player anymore. It will be of a human being that did a lot of terrible things to over a dozen women. So I don't really know what to say about it right now. All I have to say is that I hope this gets resolved quickly, and I hope we can just get back to talking about football with Deshaun Watson and not this kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, just please let this not be true.
Yeah.
And, for Deshaun Watson, who we at least I thought of as like a model citizen, right? Even with his days at Clemson and head coach Dabo Swinney, saying that Deshaun Watson was named the captain from early on, right? I mean, the dude has, allegedly so many qualities that you look for in a football player on and off the field, right? And for his first 3 years in Houston, he was, in a sense, a model citizen as well, right? We never heard any rumblings about this, and these types of allegations were never mentioned in the same breath with Deshaun Watson's name until now, and so it's very interesting, right? Because last offseason, Deshaun Watson signs that mega contract, right? Over $100 million. And I believe he's top 5 highest paid quarterbacks in the National Football League as of today, right? And then, of course, this offseason, the turmoil with him and the Texans organization and the fact that he does not want to be there anymore, that Texans organization is a dump fire. They traded away his best receiver and DeAndre Hopkins last offseason, right? J.J. Watt wanted out, and he was then released and signed by the Arizona Cardinals as well. So some of the things that organization has done have not been in favor of Deshaun Watson and helping that team win right now. Right? Deshaun Watson is not looking to rebuild. He is looking to win right now. And even with a horrible roster that the Texans put together last year, Deshaun Watson still led the NFL in passing yards, right? He was still a beast by himself. It's just, this is not basketball or an individual sport. You need other players around you in order to win in an NFL game. And so what I'm trying to say is, it's just all very interesting that these allegations are coming out right now after he signs his mega contract, right? And now with the turmoil between him and the Texans organization, I'm not sitting here and saying that these women are wrong. I'm not sitting here saying Deshaun Watson truly is a saint, because I don't know the guy personally, right? Obviously never spoken to him in my life, but I think we've seen it both ways, like you were alluding to. We have seen athletes who think that they are above the law, right? And they are, able to do anything and anything they want. And obviously that is not true, especially in 2021, right? Yeah. If these allegations are true, you're right. I will no longer look at Deshaun Watson as a football player. I will look at him as a horrible human being who deserves every single punishment that comes his way, right? And on the flip side, if these allegations are not true and these women are just looking to basically tarnish Deshaun Watson's name and or try to get money out of it, that is also wrong, right? And in that case, these women should be punished themselves. And so I think we've seen it both ways, from whether you're, an athlete or just someone that's in the spotlight. We have seen it go both ways. So you're right. For us to sit here and speculate anything is completely wrong. So all I'm going to do is say that I hope that this is not the case. You're right. I hope that this is resolved very quickly and that we can start talking about Deshaun Watson, the football player, and not these allegations, 13 different lawsuit allegations that are out there as of this moment.
Yeah, and Jared, it is going to be so interesting to see what happens from here on out, too, because obviously, we'd heard the trade asking price for a guy like Deshaun, the draft picks and all that stuff. And we had listed the teams that we thought should go after Deshaun Watson. And it will be interesting to see if, like, the free agent signings, like a guy like Tyrod Taylor, if Houston knew about any of this stuff before. And that's why they've been saying they're not going to trade him and they're not going to do all this, because maybe they don't think the value is there anymore. Obviously, if they have a quarterback sexually assaulting a bunch of women, there's not much value anymore, right? I mean, there's really no value at that point. So I just wonder two things. Did the Houston Texans know about this previously? And has that affected all the trade news and why he hasn't been traded and why he's so upset? And will we see teams maybe try to take advantage of this? And if this Deshaun Watson news doesn't end up being true, someone gets Deshaun Watson for a very undervalued trade, because regardless of what he did, he's still an amazing football player. Like, because of what he did does not make him a worse football player. He's still an amazing quarterback. So it's going to be really, really interesting the rest of the offseason to see what happens with Deshaun now, whether this stuff is true or not. Obviously, if it's true, we may not see him playing in the NFL anymore. But if it's not true, will he get traded for less? Will he get released by the Texans? Will he, it's going to be really, really interesting to follow. It's unfortunate, of course. I'm not excited to talk about this Deshaun Watson stuff. I wasn't excited to get on here on the podcast and talk about this, but we have to do our due diligence and talk about this because it's probably the biggest news in the NFL right now. And it's been absolutely shocking to me because, Jared, I agree with you too. This guy has seemed like a top 5 model NFL citizen. I mean, a guy that you've heard nothing bad about. There are players in the NFL that have laundry, dirty laundry, that if you hear something, you go, you know what? That's surprising. Deshaun Watson is not one of those guys, and that's why this is shocking. And I hope it gets resolved, and I hope that these ladies did not make these allegations, obviously, and I hope Deshaun didn't do this. It's a terrible situation, and again, I hope it gets resolved fairly quickly, and it will be interesting to find out what ends up happening from here on out with Deshaun Watson and the rest of these teams that might go after him.
Yeah, it's just, you're right. I mean, it's just a thing from last week that there was one allegation, right? And now that has all of a sudden jumped to 13 with, as of this morning, 6 more lawsuits coming forward, So that's where the more that come forward, we just continue to shake our head and say, wow, is this real? Did this really happen? And the last thing that I want to piggyback off of what you said before we move on, because we do have to get going here, is the Texans organization. You're right. And you mentioned, did the Texans know anything about this? Right now, obviously, only Deshaun Watson and these women really know what actually happened. But if you're the Texans organization and you did know about these allegations and it comes out that these allegations are true, I mean, it's just another bad look on the Houston Texans organization, right?
Yeah,
I mean, obviously they have more insight than we do, right? Or even than national or team reporters do, right? So I'm sure that they are getting more information than what is actually being put out into the media and for everyone else to see. And so if they knew something was legitimate and did not do anything about it, did not act upon it, they are almost just as much to blame, right? Because they are, in a sense, letting this happen, right? And we see this all the time where whether you're an athlete or just someone in the spotlight, you kind of get the benefit of the doubt or whatever the case may be. But it doesn't matter, right? We are all human. And like I said, if these allegations are true and he did these awful things to these women and the Houston Texans organization did nothing about it, they are just as much to blame because they are just as much a part of the problem, if that is true.
Yeah, no. It's like we said, it's going to be interesting to follow. But yeah, we're going to move on to the rest of free agency. To start this really quickly, we will not be talking most likely about any of the kind of bottom feeder teams signing up a bunch of free agents. Yes, if you look at the Cincinnati Bengals or Jacksonville Jaguars and Houston Texans, for example, they've signed the most guys. That's because they needed to, and they needed to get above the certain, like the cap that you need to get above. We're not going to be talking about those teams because we don't believe those teams, all those signings are really going to make that big of an impact on the NFL per se. So we will be talking mostly about teams that we think have improved their playoff chances, have improved their Super Bowl chances, or just flat out went crazy and signed a bunch of superstar players and all that stuff, which we really didn't see that much, but we're going to talk about as much as possible here. But I just want to let you know, if you're a fan of one of those teams that's going to suck, we're not talking about you right now. So you'll have to listen to our NFL preview to get kind of a more in-depth preview on that. So for all our fans in Jacksonville and Cincinnati, I'll see you later. But we'll move on to a team that has some of the most success in NFL history, and that's the New England Patriots. We can't talk about NFL free agency without talking about what the New England Patriots did, because, Jared, I think you and I can agree, they won free agency. This team is so much better after what they've done and the money they've spent that we have to talk about them first. So, Jared, I'll toss it to you. What do you think about the Patriots, free agency period so far with all these guys signed, and how uncharacteristic was this?
Listen, I think it's easy to say that New England won free agency simply because they spent the most, guaranteed money and contracts, and they literally signed, I think they've signed like close to 15 players, free agents so far, not even including guys that they brought back from last year's team or guys that opted out because of COVID last year, right? So obviously they have upgraded and opened their wallets in a big way. Right. And one of the biggest things that kind of sticks out to me is that in Bill Belichick's 10 years so far with New England, right, which is close to 2 decades, he has spent a total of $300 million in guaranteed money, right?
Wow.
In contracts to free agents. This offseason
Crazy.
alone, he spent over $150 million. He basically said, I'm not going through the crappy year that we had last year again, right? Like, he's admitting, yeah, we sucked last year. We were not good enough, right? Like, I'm a great coach. I have great coaches around us. Obviously, the organization is well put together, but it still takes the players on the field to win. And he realizes that he didn't have good enough players. So he said, we're going to open up our books and we're going to bring in better players than what we currently have. So I think they did bring in good players. I would not say that they brought in superstar players. They did not trade for Deshaun Watson, right? Or at least they have not yet. They did not trade for Russell Wilson. They didn't trade for Odell Beckham Jr., right? They didn't make that sexy splash that's just going to break every headline news, right? They brought in players like Jonnu Smith, like Hunter Henry. You know, they re-signed Cam Newton. So what I think they did is they brought in players that fit their scheme. So they brought in good players, some who could potentially be Pro Bowlers, but I'm just hesitant to say that they won free agency just because they have spent the most money, right? I think they brought in players that fit Bill Belichick's system that are going to do it, quote unquote, New England's way, right? They're not going to be distractions outside of the locker room or off the field. They're going to come in with their lunch pails. They're going to, put their hard hats on and basically get ready to go to work. So I think for Bill Belichick, this is exactly what he wanted. He wanted to bring in his type of guys. So we'll obviously see what happens once the pads go on and once the regular season gets started. So, I give New England and Bill Belichick props for opening up their checkbooks, which is because it's something that they just simply don't do. But to just simply sit here and say, oh my gosh, they won free agency just because they spent a boatload of money, I think it's more about the players, that you're bringing in as opposed to just, oh, we're going to sign all these guys and think it's going to work, right? I'm not so sure about that.
Well, Jared, I have to disagree with you a little bit. I think they absolutely won free agency. I think when you look at those players they signed, this team is significantly better. And also, when you look at the AFC East, the Bills haven't done much. The Dolphins have done nothing. And the Jets are the Jets, right? They're not really going to be a playoff team, most likely, unless they, trade for a big time quarterback. Like we said, the biggest time quarterback that could be traded might not be traded, right? So I think the Patriots have now, they went from a non-playoff team to, in my opinion, absolutely a playoff team. And so I'll list off the guys they've signed so far, and it's a lot. They re-signed Cam Newton, so they have their quarterback for next year. His deal is contingent. The money he's going to get is contingent on if he's a starter. If the Patriots decide to go another route, Newton signing isn't as high profile and isn't as expensive. He only gets paid $5 million, I believe, if he's the backup, $14 million if he's the starter. So, that deal's a little interesting. But that's who they're going with at quarterback. They've signed Jonnu Smith. 2 tight ends. That reminds me a lot of the Aaron Hernandez, Rob Gronkowski connection before obviously Aaron Hernandez did what he did and got kicked out of the NFL. But that's essentially they're trying to restart that with Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. Matthew Judon, one of the best defensive linemen in the NFL. He signs a big deal with them. They also signed Devon Godshaw, Henry Anderson, Kyle Van Noy, a couple of Jalen Mills on the defense. They added Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne to a really bad receiving core, right? And they've also replaced their offensive line. They got Trent Brown back from the Raiders, and they've signed David Andrews and Ted Karras as well to bolster that offensive line. So they've protected Cam Newton. I forgot to mention Dietrich Wise, defensive lineman as well. They signed as well. But now when you look at this team, they've improved their defense. They've helping Cam Newton now on the offensive line and at the wide receiver core. This team's better, and the other teams aren't doing much in the AFC East. So I just think that's why I think they won free agency. They have the most to gain now from their free agency period, whereas other teams kind of improve their team a bit, but not as much as the Patriots compared to any other team.
Yeah, listen, I'm not trying to sit here and downplay it, right? Yes, obviously the Patriots got better. I understand that. But do I put them ahead of the Bills? No, I don't. Last time I checked, the Bills still have Josh Allen. The Bills still have Stephon Diggs, right? They have a very good, I would not say elite, but a very good defense. right? I think the Bills need to get a little more talent at the running back position and maybe beef up the offensive line a little bit. But I think they have their core pieces there. So I'm still going to put the Bills ahead of the Patriots, even though New England just went out and spent all this money. So, yes, they've elevated themselves, but it's not just like, oh, slam dunk, Patriots are back in the AFC East and everyone else just sucks again, right? Yeah, you're right. The Dolphins have not made really any moves this offseason, but I think the Dolphins were trending up when last season ended. So I just, I have reservations about giving the AFC East to New England, even though it is something that we are so used to seeing, right, over the last decade or two. Actually, I have an interesting stat here, and it's something that plays into your favor, right, into your argument. And it's the teams over the last 10 years, over the last 5 years, that have spent the most cap money in NFL offseason, and how that translates to winning on the field, right, that following season. So over the last 5 years, the Dolphins last year spent the most money in free agency with $73.5 million. And this is all guaranteed money, not just total dollars, guaranteed money. Their win differential went up five wins from the previous year. 2019, the Bills spent the most money in free agency. Their win differential went up 4. 2018, the Browns spent the most money. Their win differential +7, right? So if I'm in your favor, what I'm trying to say is, yes, for that next year, teams that spend the most money tend to see a major uptick in wins, right? And some might say, oh, wow, 3, 4, 5 wins, is that really huge? Well, yeah, when you only play a 16-game schedule, 5 wins is freaking huge, right? So for New England, coming off of a subpar year, if you think about it, if New England has 3, 4 more wins, they're in the wild card, right? Easily, right? If I'm not mistaken, for as bad as we thought New England was last year, they were still on the cusp of making the playoffs. They were still in the playoff hunt leading up to the last few weeks of the season. So, to give you a little bit of props there, yes, spending a lot of money can work for these teams, but is it sustainable, right? Is it going to last long term? Is this going to be a 2, 3, 4 year window for New England, or are they just saying we're going all in right now, and we think that with Cam Newton coming back healthy, with Cam Newton having a full offseason of work, which he didn't have last year, right? He also didn't have really any weapons. Julian Edelman was his best weapon, and he was injured for most of the year, right? So now they bring in some offensive weapons at the receiver and tight end spot. You still have your plethora of running backs there. So I think with a full offseason of work and the guys that they brought in, New England will be better. I'm just, in the end, still not going to put them ahead of the Bills.
Yeah, and Jared, let me clarify something. I'm not saying they're ahead of the Bills. I just think that when you look at New England as a whole, I forgot to mention, they get Dante Hightower back. Like you said, they got Julian Edelman back. Hopefully, N'Keal Carey ends up finally being the guy they want at wide receiver. I mean, Patrick Chung did stay retired. That was some guy that we thought might come back. But this team, they improved a lot. And yes, they might not win the AFC East, but I do believe they'll make the playoffs as long as Cam Newton stays healthy. I think if Cam isn't healthy, obviously that ruins any team, right? Anytime it's not healthy, any team, is going to have a hard time making the playoffs, especially in that difficult AFC. But I think if you look at everybody as healthy as possible, and that's how you should judge these teams before the season starts, I think the Patriots, like you said, that win differential is going to go from 7 to 11 or 12, in my opinion. I think they're going to win a lot of games. But Jared, I think you forget that, you mentioned some teams. You mentioned the Bills, right? I forgot the other team you mentioned. Do any of those teams have Bill Belichick as their head coach? That's right, they don't. So that's a big part of this, too, that Bill Belichick and that coaching staff is amazing. And so when you combine all this new talent, some old talent literally got the Patriots a draft pick by going for 1 year to Miami and then coming back. But I think this is going to be a really, really good mix of the Patriots. And Robert Kraft came out and said, we didn't like losing last year, so we went and got players. He said that today. So, it's going to be interesting to watch Patriots. It should be interesting to see if the Patriots take command of the AFC East again. I'm excited to watch it. All right, Jared, let's go a little more negative on this podcast. So when you looked at teams in the offseason that needed to do something, right? And specifically needed to sign a quarterback or trade for a quarterback. One of those teams was the Chicago Bears, right? And so what did the Bears do? They went out and committed and told Andy Dalton he was their starting quarterback. The Bears signed Andy Dalton to a 1-year, $10 million deal. They also still have Nick Foles on their roster, and they've done jack squat besides that, signing a couple role players and saying that I guess our team's better. Jared Smith, what is your opinion on the Bears offseason right now?
Bears are trying to win the award for worst offseason. That's what the Bears are trying to do. They're up there with I don't know, trying to be like just one of the worst organizations in the NFL. They're trying to be the Houston Texans. They're trying to be the Jacksonville Jaguars, the New York Jets, because I simply don't understand what they're trying to do. Now, I will say when it comes to making a crazy trade, a major splash with the Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson, takes two to tango, right? Obviously, the Houston Texans have to be willing to trade Deshaun Watson. Seattle Seahawks have to be willing to trade Russell Wilson, which as it stands right now, neither of those teams are willing to do that. So I think for the Bears, they said, okay, what is our next best option? We're not going to bring back Mitchell Trubisky. We have Nick Foles, but is Nick Foles enough? Apparently, they said no. They think Andy Dalton is, at least for the time, their guy. Now, Andy Dalton, obviously, with Dallas last year, so I spent a lot of time watching him play, unfortunately, because Dak Prescott had that gruesome, catastrophic season-ending injury. Listen, Andy Dalton struggled mightily. I will say part of that was due to the Cowboys' lack of offensive line. They had some major issues injury-wise on their offensive line and just could not protect Andy Dalton or whoever was under center for Dallas. Here's the thing about Chicago. Their line sucks too. So if the Bears think that Andy Dalton is going to come and rejuvenize this team, they're completely mistaken, right? Because their offensive line is worse than Dallas, in my opinion. So, they franchise tag Allen Robinson. He stays. They have a good running back in David Montgomery. I get that. But with no offensive line, Andy Dalton is not, Kyler Murray or Lamar Jackson or even a Josh Allen type where he can really elude pressure. Like, you get one hand on Andy Dalton and that's a sack, right? Yeah. So I don't see Andy Dalton really being the guy there. Maybe for a year. I know it is only a 1-year contract. You guys couldn't do better than that. I mean, listen, just a couple years ago, y'all traded the 10th overall pick to jump up to number 2 to get Mitchell Trubisky. Like, why not do that again in this year's draft, where obviously Trevor Lawrence is going to be gone at number 1, but you've got Justin Fields, you've got obviously Zach Wilson, you've got Trey Lance. There are a plethora of guys that you can go to if you want. Trade up again. They did it 4 years ago. They should have some familiarity with trading up to get into the top 3 picks of the draft. I would have liked to see the Bears basically package a deal and do that as opposed to bring in Andy Dalton. Because right now, looking at the depth chart, they have Andy Dalton and Nick Foles. And a lot of people say when you have 2 quarterbacks, you really have none. So to me, The Bears right now have none at quarterback.
Hey, Jared, I agree with you. They have no quarterback. This deal makes no sense to me at all. While you were talking, I was looking up offensive line rankings, and then you said they were bad. And they were ranked 20th last year in the.
That's actually better than I thought.
Offensive line. Yeah, but the problem is they didn't do anything about it either. Like, they signed Jermaine Ifedi, who's a solid lineman, but when you look at like the Arizona Cardinals, what we've already done with our offensive line, it's nowhere near close, right? The Bears aren't trying to improve their team. They're trying damage control here's the thing, Jared. I know that Ryan Fitzpatrick, I think he signed before Andy Dalton did in free agency. But, like, why wasn't Ryan Fitzpatrick a guy you go out and get immediately if you're the Bears? Because I think if the Bears get Ryan Fitzpatrick, we're not talking about it being a horrible signing. Andy Dalton proved last year that he couldn't change a team, right? You know that. The Cowboys were not good, and it's because they had a bad offensive line and a bad defense. Now, the Bears at least have a good defense, but a bad offensive line. And so Andy Dalton he has no mobility, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. Plus, Jared, did you see what Trubisky got signed for by the Bills to be a backup? $3 million. Why couldn't you just sign back Trubisky for like $3, $4, $5 million? Trubisky's a better quarterback, in my opinion, than Andy Dalton. Why not go back with the guy?
Backup quarterback.
Why not go back with the guy that knows the book and actually shined a couple times last year? Trubisky took a little bit of a step up I thought. So I don't know, man. If you're a Bears fan, I feel bad for you because and then right, and Kyle Fuller immediately signs with Denver right after that. It's just this team got worse, and that's why I think they had one of the worst free agent periods, or if not the worst. And if you're a Bears fan, you better hope maybe that they draft a quarterback still, and that they just don't believe maybe that any of the quarterbacks coming out that they could draft are worthy to play next year, and they just need a placeholder. Maybe that's what they think. But as far as there's a lot of things, there's a lot of guys they could have gotten that weren't named Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson or anybody else that would have been better than Andy Dalton. I mean, even Nick Foles you could potentially say is better than Andy Dalton. So, yeah, I'm not excited to watch the Bears next year. I'll tell you that right now.
The only thing that I have a little gripe with is the fact that last year, it to me was somewhat of a wash for Andy Dalton, right? Because when he had to come in and take over for Dak, yes, they had their three best receivers still in Ezekiel Elliott at the running back spot, but their offensive line was completely decimated, right? And so I don't care who was under center. I don't care if it was Lamar Jackson, right? Lamar Jackson was going to get sacked behind that Dallas Cowboys offensive line. So to me, last year didn't really show me anything good or bad from Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton proved that he doesn't deserve to be a starting quarterback anymore from his time in Cincinnati, right? His last 2 years in Cincinnati. That's when he proved, and that is the reason why Cincinnati let him go, was because his poor play, showed that he does not deserve to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. And he was lucky to be a backup in Dallas, where he was able to get paid. And like I said, best job in the world, be a backup quarterback, get to hold a clipboard all day long, and get paid $3 million, right? So to me, that is best. I mean, listen, for Andy Dalton, I don't think here's where I'm actually going to draw the line. I'm actually not sitting here and like trying to say anything negative about Andy Dalton, because Andy Dalton went and got his money, right? Like if I'm Andy Dalton and I have the opportunity to go start somewhere and make $10 million salary, I'm like, you're going to be an idiot to turn that down. What I'm saying is like, this is the Bears' fault. This is the Bears organization just basically not having a sense for what a good quarterback is, right? I mean, really, when was the last time the Bears had a good quarterback? Was it Jay Cutler, like in his early years?
Jared.
I mean,
I think it was Jim McMahon. I think it was Jim McMahon.
And when did Jim McMahon play for the Bears?
The 1980s.
So you're telling me the Bears had not had a legitimate, sustainable quarterback since the 1980s?
No, because I mean, even if you look at the one time they were in the Super Bowl, they had Rex Grossman, right? That team's always been led by defense, right? And it's still led by defense. The problem is, clearly in today's NFL, you need somewhat of a serviceable starting quarterback, and Mitchell Trubisky hadn't done that. Nick Foles isn't that. Rex Grossman wasn't that. Jay Cutler wasn't that. And I don't think Andy Dalton is that. So you can have the best defense in the world, but you a quality quarterback. And I don't think Andy Dalton and Nick Foles are either of those. And yes, I know Nick Foles won a Super Bowl technically, but you're going to tell me that the Eagles would have been in that position if Nick Foles was the starter all that year? I don't think so. Okay, he got lucky that Carson Wentz got hurt, and he worked out perfectly with Doug Peterson. Yeah, maybe if Doug Peterson was the coach of the Bears, I'd be saying it differently. But, yeah, this team hasn't had a legitimate starting quarterback since, I'd say, Jim McMahon. And they still have been great some years, but this is a different NFL than even Rex Grossman's NFL, right? You can't – a defense, in my opinion, can't be the only thing now. You have to have a solid quarterback. You can't have a bad quarterback anymore, or I don't think you can win the Super Bowl. Even in the Legion of Boom days, it's well, no, I'm not. Legion of Boom is a bad example. Even Joe Flacco, I think, is way more of a serviceable quarterback when he was in this position than, say, an Andy Dalton or Nick Foles. I just don't like it at all.
Yeah, no, listen, there's not much more to say. I think at the end of the day, you have to start with looking at, okay, we didn't win the division last year. How can we win our division, right? And obviously you have to look up at Green Bay. They still got Aaron Rodgers. They re-signed Aaron Jones, still Devontae Adams, right? And a solid defense. So to me, the Bears and every other team in that division have to say, okay, how can we get better? How can we challenge the Packers? Signing Andy Dalton to me is not challenging the Packers at all, right? That is the Bears
No,
staying
neither.
basically exactly where they are, still stuck in the sand. So unless the Bears trade up to draft one of these high-profile quarterbacks in this year's draft, right, then maybe I'll have a different tone. But if they do not do that and they just sit where they are and they think that Andy Dalton is going to be their guy this year, I think they're in a world of hurt. And listen, obviously, who knows who's coming out in the draft next year, but I can almost guarantee next year's crop of quarterbacks coming out in the NFL draft will not be as this talented, nor will it be as much depth as there is this year, right? So if there's any year to get a quarterback out of the draft, it is this year. If the Bears don't do that, Bears fans, you might want to find a new team.
Yeah, I mean, if you're the Packers looking at the rest of the division, you go, okay, well, Kirk Cousins is still the quarterback of the Vikings. Jared Goff is now the quarterback of the Lions. And Andy Dalton is the starter for the Bears. Let's get ready. Let's sell those playoff tickets, right? Unless Aaron Rodgers gets hurt, Packers, they won the NFC North. Jared, we probably don't even need to do our roster overview because Packers are going to win, right? And probably those other three teams probably won't make play. I mean, maybe the Vikings, you never know, but they're kind of off and on every year. It's going to be interesting. Let's move on to a little more positive. Well, maybe not positive for you. I think not going to be very positive for you, but it's going to be positive in my sense as a there's been two teams that have improved their team mightily and look a lot better. Now, one team did a lot more, but because they're in the same division, I'm going to mention them both, the Washington football team and the New York Giants. What we said about Washington, first of all, they haven't made as many moves. As far as I know, their biggest moves have been obviously signing William Jackson, a very, very good corner from Cincinnati. Curtis Samuel, 3 years, $34 million to be a wide receiver alongside Terry McLaurin. And they improved at the quarterback position in Ryan Fitzpatrick, as well as keeping the main core of that defense together. So I think the Washington football team going into next year will be pretty solid. Then when you look at the Giants, Jared, when we recorded a couple days ago in our lost episode, I didn't really mention the Giants at all. I did mention that I said sneakily they're having a good offseason, but then since then they have signed Kyle Rudolph to a 2-year deal to be their tight end alongside Evan Ingram. They have signed that'd be Kenny Golladay, 4 years, $72 million to be their top wide receiver. And just now they signed Adoree Jackson to a 3-year, $39 million deal. This team, along with re-signing Leonard Williams to a very, very big contract to be their top defensive lineman, off the COVID list as far as the guy that didn't. This team, two things, is going to be better next year, and two, now the pressure's really on Daniel Jones, right? We said this in our last podcast. We said Daniel Jones, it's his year to prove. Now they gave him a good wide receiver. They improved his offensive line, and they improved his defense. Now if he sucks, he's gone, right? But I think those two teams improved. Yes, the Cowboys are getting Dak Prescott back, and they've made a couple solid signings in free agency as well. But, Jared, just talk to me a little bit about the NFC East. Obviously, you're a fan of the Cowboys, but what do you think about the NFC East, besides the Eagles, of course, who we believe probably will end up not being very good? What do you think about the top three teams in the NFC East? Like, who has the edge right now as the top team, in your opinion?
Oh, it's still Dallas, and that's not me being biased because I'm a Cowboys fan, right? I look at them and I say they have no doubt the best quarterback. It's not even an argument to who is the best quarterback under center in that NFC East, and that's Dak Prescott, right? Then you throw in Ezekiel Elliott, you throw in the three-headed monster at receiver with CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, and Michael Gallup, right? If they get their two tackles back and Tyron Smith and La'el Collins, plus Zach Martin, who is arguably the best guard in all of the NFL, right? They get that offensive line back and rolling. I'm not going to say it's going to be the offensive line in 2015, 2016, but if they can become solid again, that is, to me, easily the best offense in this entire division. Then, with the addition of Dan Quinn as defensive coordinator, right? If they can just be average, they don't have to be great, just be an average defense. This is Dallas's division to lose, right? So to me, it is clear and cut away. Dallas and everyone else. I think the Washington football team is next on that list, and they could slide in as a wild card. I think that defense is very much elite. Those pass rushers are nasty. So, like, if I'm Dak Prescott, I'm saying I better get my offensive line back because Washington can pressure the quarterback. That is what they do best, right? And now they may not have the best secondary, but I will always say it. If you have a good line that can get to the quarterback, you don't need all pros in the secondary because they're not having to cover as long, right? So to me, Washington is led by their defense. You're right. They bring in a guy in Curtis Samuel to pair with Terry McCullen, who's another great receiver. Those guys were both at Ohio State as well. So an Ohio State connection right there. And then you get the gunslinger in Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's not afraid to sling the ball around, has seen every single defense imaginable in the history of football, right? So he's not going to be flustered by really anything. And you get Ron Rivera as your head coach, who's very solid and well respected in the locker room. So I think the Washington football team is good and can definitely compete to get into the playoffs. I just think that it is Dallas's division to lose. Now, when you want to talk about the Giants, I think it's just laughable. I really do. Because you mentioned Daniel Jones. To me, Daniel Jones is what is going to hold this team back. Daniel Jones, since he has entered the league, from the quarterback perspective, has turned the ball over the most. And I'm talking about interceptions and fumbles, right? We're talking about the same dude that last year, when they played the Philadelphia Eagles, it was either Sunday night or a Monday night football game, had a wide open, clear path, 70-yard run to what would have been a potential touchdown, and he literally tripped over himself. I mean, that's the guy that we're talking about right now, that tripped over himself with no defender within 10 yards of him. And we're going to say that this guy is going to lead the Giants to not only the division title, but to the playoffs. I'm sorry. I don't see it happening. Obviously, Saquon Barkley coming back from an ACL injury, one of the best and most freakish athletic running backs in the entire NFL. You're right. Kenny Golladay is great to pair him with Darius Slayton, who I think will slide in as a really good number 2. Evan Ingram, who finally produced a little bit at the tight end spot this year. And you're right. Bringing in Adoree Jackson to pair with Logan Ryan at the corner spot, and then signing Leonard Williams, who they traded for last year. I think those are some nice additions. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to Daniel Jones. And in my opinion, Daniel Jones will choke every single time. He will turn the ball over. He might give you 2 or 3 touchdowns in the game, but I can guarantee you he will get you at least 1, more than likely 2 turnovers. He's going to give you a fumble, right? If the dude gets sacked, it's over. Like, he's got butterfingers once he gets sacked. Once he gets touched, it's like he can't take a sack and hold on to the football. So to me, Daniel Jones is what is holding this team back. Now, I'm not saying that they should probably jump up and draft one of these high-profile quarterbacks coming out of college this year.
Wow.
I don't think they're going to, because I think they're No, I'm being dead serious right now. Like,
you gotta give Daniel Jones a chance, though. They've had no talent.
2 years. They've had no
talent. This is the thing, Jared. Remember we said it's on him this year before they signed Golladay and Rudolph and all these. Not like Rudolph and John Ross are going to make a difference, but Kenny Golladay is a big difference. Evan Ingram we saw really play well, made the Pro Bowl last year, and they bolstered the offensive line a bit too. So I'm not saying that I think the Giants are still third place. I would disagree with you. I do think Washington at this point is the best team, because I'll say this, and I heard something this morning that the Cowboys in their last 17 games with Dak at quarterback are 6-11. So that would not be making the playoffs, Terry. That would not be making the playoffs. So all I'm saying is I think Washington, as of right now, that they improved their quarterback position. They're not going to be, remember last year they played Dwayne Haskins a bunch of games, right? So I believe if they would have had Alex Smith the entire year, they probably would have been the leaders of the NFC East, most of the season. And there wouldn't have been that ridiculousness at the end of the season with the Giants being 4-12 and almost making the playoffs, stuff like that. But, I will say one thing that you are right about is Dak Prescott is the best quarterback. We know we're going to get from Ryan Fitzpatrick. And if Daniel Jones does turn that corner in year 3, maybe they can be the best team. I just think it's interesting, and I think the Washington and New York have done a good job in free agency improving their teams. And just like I was talking about with the Patriots positively, I think, I would consider Washington a playoff team at this point. And New York, if everything goes right, could be a playoff team. The Cowboys, they need a better defensive play. They have a new coach. They're going to get offensive line improvements. They have one of the best, if not the best, skill players in the NFL all on one team. So yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure. All right, I want to go down before we talk about a couple more teams. Just a couple other teams that made some impacts here. Jared, we're not going to talk about these. I just want to mention these just for people that don't know. Minnesota Vikings, they signed Patrick Peterson, 1 year, $10 million. They also added Dalvin Thompson for 2 years, $22 million. Not much there, but two solid signings. Let's see here. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they bring back Shaq Barrett. They bring back Gronk. They're the Super Bowl champs, and they kind of replenish their roster. Yeah, they replenish their roster, and they have essentially everybody coming back to run it back. So it's a good job. Good job, Bucks. Ravens, 3 high-profile signings. Derek Wolfe is back for 3 years. They signed linebacker Tyus Bowser, 4 years, $22 million. And offensive lineman Kevin Zeitler from the Cleveland Browns, 3 years, $22 million. So not that many signings because they have cap issues, but all 3 of them counted. Let's move down the list. Chiefs, the crazy thing about the Chiefs was they released all their offensive linemen. They signed back 2 solid ones, Kyle Long, Joe Thuney, and then Mike Remmers earlier today. So they're improving their offensive line. Is it better than it used to be? Probably not. But those shocking releases don't look as bad now. Broncos, they signed Ronald Darby and they signed Kyle Fuller. So they figured out their corners. And the biggest news out of the last couple of days, Justin Simmons gets the record for a safety. Justin Simmons was a top 3 safety last year. He gets his deserved money. The Broncos, like usual, go all in on defense. Now, we can talk about them any day about Drew Lock. It's a similar situation to the New York Giants. Do they have the right quarterback? But again, free agency-wise, solid signings there. Let's go down the list. Trent Williams obviously re-signs giant contract, 6 years, $138 million. Back to the 49ers. They made a couple other signings here and there too. They need a quarterback, though. Jimmy Garoppolo is not it. Chargers, they've improved their offensive line. They also signed Jared Cook. The offensive linemen they signed were Matt Fielder and Corey Linsley. Corey Linsley is over $6 million. And the last team I'll bring up in this is the Tennessee Titans. I said on this podcast in my AFC roster review that the Titans defense could be one of the worst in the league. And in the free agency period and in the draft, they need to improve their defense. Well, that is what they've done. They've re-signed Jayon Brown, one of their best defenders. They brought in Norris Jenkins to be one of their corners. They have released Adoree Jackson, but they bring in Jenkins. They signed Danico Autry, a very good defensive lineman, 3 years, $7 million a year. And then Bud Dupree, 5 years, over $80 million to the Titans. They've done a good job. Any other teams that you wanted to mention, Jared, before we kind of move on to the, I'd say probably the last team we're going to talk about here, or last few teams?
No. The only real team that I wanted to talk about, which you already brought up, was the Tampa Bay Bucks. And it's not the fact that they have really done anything in free agency as far as bringing in outside help, but they did what many of us didn't think they were going to be able to do, which was re-sign all of their own guys in-house, right? It was like, okay, Shaq Barrett coming off of the Super Bowl, double-digit sacks, he's going to be, too much of too pricey to re-sign, right? Levante David was really one of the only players that I could have really seen come back because he's played his entire career with Tampa. Obviously he's very familiar there, and I think would have been more willing to take somewhat of a hometown discount. But obviously they were able to get Levante David, Shaq Barrett. They're trying to get Ndamukong Suh back as well. And then obviously they franchise tagged Chris Godwin. So that team is literally going for 2 with almost as much of the same core as they had, right? Really, other than their draft picks, this is going to be a very similar team. So it's very surprising because in the NFL, there is always so much turnover from year to year, which is why we see so much parity in this particular sport as opposed to others. But I could actually see Tampa Bay competing, and I will not be surprised if this same nucleus, this same core, is able to get themselves back into the NFC Championship game and potentially the Super Bowl again, because they are, like we said, going for 2. So, very surprising that they were able to keep all of their guys. You do not see it that often, and we will see now if they can, in effect, go for 2.
So, it sure will be interesting to see the Buccaneers. Anytime you got a Super Bowl champion kind of remain the same and not lose much, scary. Oh, yeah, and then their quarterback is Tom Brady. So Tom Brady also extended was another deal they made. Pretty good deal, right? To keep Tom Brady, that's a pretty good free agency move. All right, Jared, I'll ask you this question. So who do you think will be better off next year? Like, who will improve more next year after their signings between these two teams? The Cleveland Browns and the Arizona Cardinals. These are 2 teams that I thought teams will be better after this signing. At the biasness, although maybe my answer would shock a couple people that I'm not as fond of the Cardinals as I am of the Browns, but I wanted to ask you, who looks better to you? Like, will the Cardinals make the playoffs after their signings, and will the Browns take that next step and potentially be a Super Bowl contender with their signings and their roster? What do you think?
I like what both teams did. I will say this. I think, no doubt, the Cardinals have the tougher division, right? And so the Cardinals
that's good. Damn right.
Really had to go out and upgrade. And obviously you upgrade with a J.J. Watt, right, on that defensive line to pair with Chandler Jones. That's just going to be a nasty defensive line, right, as long as those guys can stay healthy, because the last couple of years, both of those players have had – if they can, I think that's huge. Losing Patrick Peterson for the Cardinals, to me, was a little strange. And here's why. If I'm Patrick Peterson, I don't think he's playing for money anymore, right? And not to say that he's always been about money either, but obviously as an athlete, you want to get, highest dollar value that you can. But to me, to go from Arizona to Minnesota, like, is Minnesota really that much more of a contender than Arizona? Yeah, I don't think so, right? You've played in Arizona your entire career, and now you're going to uproot and move to Minnesota where it's cold most of the year, right? It's not going to be sunny like it is in Arizona. And to me, it's like, yeah, Minnesota has obviously Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, and Kirk Cousins, who was like regular season quarterback, but in the playoffs can't do anything, right? And then that defense was awful last year, even though head coach Mike Zimmer is a defensive-minded coach. So to me, that one is a little shocking, because I think if Patrick Peterson were to have left Arizona, it would have gone to a team that is literally ready to contend right now. And I just don't see Minnesota doing that. So I would have thought that Arizona could have been able to keep Patrick Peterson. I think that would have been – so I think that one's going to sting a little bit. We'll see, obviously, what they do in the draft. I think they're going to have to address the secondary. But that one, to me, is going to sting. So I will say Arizona, because of the major signing of J.J. Watt, and because actually no, did they lose Kenyon Drake in free agencies? Kenyon Drake no longer.
They lost Kenyon Drake, yeah.
Okay, so that one's big. Who's their running back right now?
Well, okay, so I'll tell you this. Amongst Cardinals fans and apparently our GM today, we actually like Chase Edmonds better than Kenyon Drake anyways last year. So we see that as a plus. That's all I'm going to say. But if you look at the Cardinals Reddit, or you talk to our GM essentially said, we might not do anything in free agency with our running backs because we trust Chase Edmonds. So, and I agree with him. I'm fine with Chase Edmonds being a guy. Now, would I like Najee? But if we don't, I think corner is bigger for us. I think, maybe another defensive, maybe another linebacker, something like that. There's better positions that we need more as the Cardinals than a running back, because I believe our running back is, I think when you look at like Chase Edmonds, I think he's better than the Rams running backs, right? So why go out and sign a guy when you already have a very, very solid running back? And I think the guys behind him too, our depth guys, could play roles in the passing game and stuff like that and be fine. I don't think Kenyon Drake last year disappointed a bit for a lot of us, although his stats might look good. I think Kyler Murray has a lot to do with that. And when Chase Edmonds would come on the field, it was like an explosion. So I'll just say that. I wanted to say this. I think the Cardinals are better, and I do think they're a playoff team after their signings. And one of the two things about these two teams' free agencies was the depth that they added. Not necessarily the big time signings. I think you're right. I think when you look at the Cardinals, they'll probably improve more than the Browns win-wise. I think the Cardinals could win 10, 11 games next year, maybe a little bit more if Kyler Murray goes off, right? The Browns, what were they, 12-4, 11-5 last year? They probably won't win too many more games than that. But the depth signings, the Browns, they signed Tack McKinley, Anthony Walker, Malik Jackson, Troy Hill, Rashad Higgins. These depth guys to positions that they have good players at, they're
John
depth
Johnson.
now. Yeah, no, well, no, Johnson's going to be a starter. Johnson is a great signing. They needed a safety. And then when you look at the Cardinals, right? They signed AJ Green. Did they need AJ Green? Probably not, right? But they signed AJ Green, right? He makes the wide receiver room better. Now Christian Kirk is the third option. That's really impressive. And if Larry comes back, those four wide receivers, can you find a better group in the league? Maybe not. Also, the Cardinals have made a rash of offensive lineman signings. They signed back Calvin Beecham to be their other tackle. And just today, they signed two depth linemen, Max Garcia and Brian Winters, to shore up what was already the number 12 offensive line in the NFL. And obviously, if all those guys stay healthy. And then, meanwhile, they trade for Rodney Hudson, right, to make their offensive line better. So that Cardinals, you're looking at, they're going to be a top 10 offensive line next year if they're healthy. So I will say this, though. When you look at the Browns, Jared, this is a good team. And the step up that Baker Mayfield made last year, this team is scary. Let me just tell you what this team is now. You got Baker Mayfield at quarterback, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt at running back. Odell Beckham Jr. comes back off his injury. He's still with Jarvis Landry at wide receiver. Their tight ends are Austin Hooper and Harrison Bryant. Their offensive line was number 1 in the NFL. All those guys came back. Then when you look at their defense, Myles Garrett, one of the best defenders in the league. Sheldon Richardson, Malik Jackson, like I mentioned, linebacker, guys like Matt Wilson, Taki. And the corners, Troy Hill, Denzel Ward, Greedy Williams, Grant Delpit, and John Johnson III, all as DBs. Jared, that's one of the best teams in the NFL, right? They'll go as far as Baker Mayfield takes him, but, I mean, the Browns can do nothing else to this roster, in my opinion. And so I think their signing of depth is just as impressive as like J.J. Watt and A.J. Green going to the Cardinals. And so I'm really looking forward to watching the Browns next year. And I hope there's not a 17th game added, because then we would have to play the Browns. And I don't want to play the Browns. The Browns are scary. And we saw what they did to Pittsburgh. And, they were really close to beating the Chiefs. Even before Patrick Mahomes got hurt, they were playing well in that game. So it's going to be interesting. I wanted to end the podcast by talking about the New Orleans Saints, because when we look at, we just talked about Andy Dalton and Nick Foles. Well, we don't really know who the quarterback's going to be in New Orleans. And let me say this too. The Saints, as far as I know, let me go down my list real quick. The Saints have not done really anything in free agency besides re-sign Jameis Winston, 1 year, $12 million, and extend Taysom Hill. Here's who they've lost. Drew Brees, retirement, right? Trey Hendrickson, who signs a massive deal with the Cincinnati Bengals. Sheldon Rankins, Emmanuel Sanders, Janoris Jenkins, Jared Cook, Quan Alexander, punter Thomas Morstead, Malcolm Brett, tight end Justin Hill. Jared, the Saints might not be that good next year. So first of all, Jared, what do you think about the Saints losing all these guys? And then talk about the quarterback situation. What do you think they should do with quarterback over there in New Orleans?
They've still got Sean Payton. That's really, listen, when you look at the Saints, when I look at the Saints in all seriousness, I'm looking at Michael Thomas, I'm looking at Alvin Kamara, right? I'm looking at their offensive line, and I'm looking at Sean Payton, right? I think their defense was good last year, but you're right. The players, at least up front, that they lost, Sheldon Rankins and some of those other players, I think that's going to really hurt them and really cost them, especially when you have to play Tom Brady twice a year, right? Matt Ryan can still play with the Atlanta Falcons. So from a defensive perspective, I think they got a little worse. And obviously, here's the thing. Offensively, Drew Brees couldn't throw the ball 15 yards down the field last year, right? So Jameis Winston, I think they're going to get a little more firepower, at least attempt to throw the ball downfield and stretch out the defense. So to me, offensively, I can see them scoring more points or at least being a little more lethal. But how many points are they going to be giving up on defense? So I don't know if they actually got better as a team. They might have gotten better in certain areas, but they definitely got worse in other areas as well. So I would not call this a complete team either. I think this is going to be one of Sean Payton's most difficult coaching years. And if this team can come out of it, successfully with either double-digit wins or close to it with like 9 and squeak into the playoffs as a wild card, I think you have to like really consider Sean Payton for head coach of the year because of what he now has to work with, right? Jameis Winston, we know the last time that he was a starter for 16 seasons, Jameis Winston threw 30 touchdowns. He also threw 30 interceptions, right? So Jameis Winston should have been the defensive player of the year for giving away so many damn interceptions. I'm dead serious about that, right? So we know that he can chuck it around, but what's his accuracy going to be like? And how many times is he actually going to be throwing to his receivers as opposed to defending cornerbacks and safeties? That's the real question I have there. So I'm not going to sit here and say that this Saints team is ready to come back and win the division, because let's also remember the last 2 seasons, Saints have won this division, right? Even though we all talk about the Bucs, who obviously won the Super Bowl, Buccaneers didn't win the division. The Buccaneers were a wild card and had to play 3 straight road games in order to get to the Super Bowl. It was the Saints, and it has been the Saints over the last 4 or 5 years that have really run this division. I think we're about to see things change. I think the Buccaneers, clearly the best team in the division, outright should win, and the Saints should hope to make the playoffs as a wild card.
Yeah, it's just always concerning a little bit. And obviously, it's probably cap issues and stuff like that, but it's concerning when you lose so much, right? Because you got new players coming into a new playbook, stuff like that. In fact, you don't have to worry about that because, yeah, Taysom Hill's been there for a couple of years. Winston's in his 2nd year, right? So, I feel like the Saints, this is really, Jared, like another one of those teams where, we saw the contract that Taysom Hill got. Now, the way that contract works out is, he's essentially, it's a 1-year deal. He's getting paid $35 million this year to be whatever, right? You think Jameis Winston is going to start. I think you're going to pay a guy $35 million. He should probably be the starter, right? And I think they probably both will, which is
both
weird.
Going to play.
Right. But this is the thing. So, Jared, why are we not keeping the same energy with the Saints as we are with the Bears and with other teams with the 2 quarterbacks, right? Why, just because Sean Payton's there, are we now saying that the Saints are going to be a playoff team because Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston are there? I don't think either of those guys proved last year that they were a replacement for Drew Brees.
Okay, give me Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill as the, kind of come in option quarterback, whatever you want to do. I don't think Taysom Hill's reps are going to decline. I think they're only going to increase, right? We saw Taysom Hill come in the game for the last 2 years and not necessarily spell Drew Brees, but it was just Sean Payton had certain packages specifically for Taysom Hill. I think that is only going to advance and continue with Jameis Winston. I think you could see either once a series or once every other series, Taysom Hill coming in for some spot duty and his specific packages. So I think it's going to be a combination of Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill playing quarterback. Give me that all day and twice on Sundays over Andy Dalton and the Chicago Bears and what they're doing. There is no question about that. Plus, you add Sean Payton as head coach, and I get it. Nagy for the Bears is supposed to be this offensive genius, offensive guru. Well, we haven't seen that so far in his short time with the Bears. And I say short as I believe he's going into his, 3rd or 4th year as the head coach there. And I'm sorry, but that is enough time to prove your worth. And he has not done that at all. So, yeah, give me Jameis Winston, give me Taysom Hill. I'm sorry. That is a way better combination than the likes of Andy Dalton.
All I'm saying, you lose that much and you got 2 quarterbacks, which you said means no quarterback. I think the Saints team's in trouble. I think it's in trouble.
I knew you were going to say it. I knew you were going to bring up something like that. I knew you were going to say it. But guess what? This, to me, is a different scenario because it's not like to me, I don't think these 2, and Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill, are competing for the starting quarterback job spot. I think it is Jameis Winston's to lose, and I think Taysom Hill is specifically there for his allotted package, right? His specific package of the Wildcat, and obviously he plays tight end, he plays receiver, he's on special teams. He does so many other things that I don't see Taysom Hill being the starting quarterback for a full 16-game season. Now, he was for 4 games when Drew Brees was injured, but I think that's because they don't think Jameis Winston was ready. Now that Jameis Winston will have a full offseason, he'll be able to know this offense better. I think it is Jameis Winston as the actual starting quarterback and Taysom Hill coming in for specific packages. To me, that's not a quarterback competition. That's just Sean Payton saying, I like Taysom Hill so much. Even when I had Drew Brees, I was bringing in Taysom Hill to spell Drew Brees. So this isn't a competition, in my opinion. This is Sean Payton has a specific plan for how he's going to use both of these quarterbacks.
All I'm saying, Jared, you don't pay a quarterback $35 million to play a couple snaps.
He's not getting $35 million. He's not getting $35 million.
I know.
Do you know how many incentives? You know how many incentives he has to hit to do that? He's got to play like 80% of the snaps, right? Jameis Winston would have to get injured. Taysom Hill would have to come in and throw like 30 touchdowns. He would have to lead him to the playoffs, lead him into the NFC Championship game, into the Super Bowl for him to get that $35 million. That's not happening, right? He might get like 10 or 12 as like a base salary, but the dude is not going to make $35 million. Okay, I'm sorry. That's blasphemous.
We'll see. I don't trust Jameis Winston, but we will see. All right, to end this podcast, I just want to go over. We're not going to talk about this. I just want to mention who is not signed yet. Some high-profile names. I'm not going to go through a whole list. Just a couple guys that kind of, you have T.Y. Hilton has not been signed yet. Jadeveon Clowney, who I think is the most overrated NFL player right now. He is not signed yet. Malcolm Butler. Eric Fisher, coming off, obviously, it was a torn Achilles, torn ACL in the Super Bowl. He's unsigned yet. Let's see. Trey Turner. I believe Trey Turner, there was rumors about him going somewhere, but apparently he's not signed yet. Richard Sherman, Sammy Watkins, and Ndamukong Suh, like you mentioned earlier, Jared. So there's a lot of guys still out there, not as great as it was, say, a week ago, but there's still some moves that will happen. And so next podcast, we will cover any big-time moves. I don't know if any of those guys necessarily deserve a whole podcast segment, but, there's still some guys out there that are very, very solid NFL players. Melvin Ingram's another one, too, from Los Angeles Chargers, formerly Los Angeles Chargers. He's another guy out there, too. So should be interesting to see that. But, yeah, as far as this podcast goes, we are finished. We hope that we helped you out, understand what happened in free agency, who we thought kind of the winners and losers were, who we thought did well, and who we think is going to stink next year. Jared, I'll say this too. At least with this free agency period, I thought a lot of teams did a good job. Like there wasn't as many teams as you think did a bad job. I just think specifically when you look at the Bears and when you look at the Saints, a little off, right? So it's been interesting. I think a lot of teams in this really difficult year where there was almost $16 million lost on the cap when it was supposed to go up $16 million or something like that. I commend teams for doing what they've done so far.
Yeah, no doubt. And to piggyback off of that, I'm actually surprised at how many players are signing 2, 3, and even some 4-year contracts, right?
Yeah.
We heard last week how the NFL signed that multi-billion-dollar contract, new TV deal, right, with ESPN and CBS and Fox, to where there's going to be a lot of revenue that will end up trickling down to these athletes in the next year or two, right? So not only will the salary cap skyrocket next offseason, but players' contracts will as well. And so I think for this offseason period, you saw between just the stars and kind of the average depth players, I was surprised we didn't see more 1-year deals where guys were kind of betting on themselves and basically saying, I'm going to take a short 1-year deal here, whether it's with my current team or a new team. And then next offseason, I'm going to really cash in when that new TV money deal comes in. So I think that's kind of what we see, why we might see a Sammy Watkins still on the street or a T.Y. Hilton or even a Jadeveon Clowney, even though you think is completely overrated. I think some of these guys are trying to say, okay, you know what, we're at a period now where, I'm not going to get that 3 or 4 year deal for that mega $100 million, right? So maybe it is better if I just take a 1-year deal and then obviously basically come back to the negotiating table next offseason and try to get paid, 3 times what I would make this year.
Yeah, and obviously guys were released. For my Cardinals, I think we probably would have been able to bring back Patrick Peterson if it weren't have been for this salary cap year. But that's what happens. A lot of other teams have lost other players, and the NFL will be interesting next year because there's a lot of turnover. And we'll expect a little bit more turnover. Obviously, the draft coming up. Lots of interesting stuff. Next week, Jared, we will most likely have some more roster overviews now with free agency done. Be a lot more interesting because we'll kind of really know what teams are going to look like. So it will be a different style, but we still have the AFC East, the NFC North, the NFC West, and the AFC North still to do. So we will be doing one or two of those next week, and throughout the next couple of weeks, we'll finish all four of those, and then we'll do that before the draft starts. But for this podcast, we are done. I am Nick Nenad.
I'm Jared Smith.
And we will see you next week. See you guys.